this evening. We are here tonight at this wonderful event in Newry, organised by the Newry Next Chapter. And the women of the chapter they form part of the bigger Next Chapter project, which is supported by the European Union's Peace 4 programme. And that's managed by the special EU programmes body. The Next Chapter is a project targeting women to develop their ideas, build communities, and support the transition out of conflict. The Next Chapter aims are to improve the representation of women in public and political life, and contribute to a more gender-sensitive society in Northern Ireland and the border regions of the Republic of Ireland. And I have to say welcome to some of the chapter members from Cavan and Donegal. You're very, very welcome here today. The project is delivered in partnership by Politics Plus, Irish Rural Link and Northern Ireland Council for Voluntary Action, NICFA. The Next Chapter contributes to the SEUPV's overarching programme output of regional level projects that result in meaningful, purposeful and sustained contact between persons from different communities. Match funding for the project has been provided by the Department of Rural and Community Development in Ireland and the Executive Office in Northern Ireland. The Next Chapter includes the creation of a network of people working together to support peace and reconciliation, mobilising social change in their own communities and nurturing aspirations on a shared future. 10 chapters across the region have been developed, 4 along the southern side of the border and 6 in Northern Ireland. Participants in the project have received capacity development training, attended reconciliation networking events, including 2 Ambassador Forum events, and trips to Parliament buildings at Stormont and Dáil Éireann in Dublin. For me, the Next Chapter has been an amazing journey where I have formed friendships with stunning women that I had not known before this began. So I hope you enjoy this evening. I'm going to pass you over now to Eileen Fagan. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Can I just make sure everybody's settled and comfortable in their seats? They all have orange juice and sparkling water and everything you need before we begin. We all happy? Yes. And it's great to see such a huge showing on a night where the wind and rain I was afraid it was going to put everyone off. So congratulations for coming tonight. As Mary said, my name is Eileen Fagan and I'm one of the founder members of the new community group called Next Chapter Newry. Now we have hosted this event tonight to inform the local community of the enormous contribution women have already made to peace, stability and lasting prosperity in Northern Ireland. We're at a very critical moment here in Northern Ireland. We haven't had a government for over 3 years. There's an election in 3 weeks' time. And we are at the hard core of the Brexit discussions. It's a time of great uncertainty. And it's also very frightening that so many talented women across the United Kingdom and in Northern Ireland are being put off politics by constant online abuse and threats, and even by street harassment. Days before the Brexit referendum, Joe Cox was murdered in the street. So there's a very real sense that women in politics, we may have come a long way since we got the vote in 1918, but there's a real sense that it's a dangerous place for women. So that's one of the reasons that we are having this event tonight. Also, 21 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we will look back at how a group of women, both Catholic and Protestant, came together in the midst of the conflict to form an all-female political party which fought for and won a place at the negotiating table. Without them, those negotiations may have had a very different outcome. As we will see in the film about to be shown, Wave Goodbye to the Dinosaurs. Now, the Women's Coalition overcame amazing odds to start a political party, to get elected and to stay with the process, despite often extreme reactions from the dinosaurs. I think you know who we're talking about when I mention dinosaurs, and if you don't, you will see some evidence of them in the film. Yet, despite all the pressure and sometimes downright insults that they had to endure, they stayed with it, and they fought to ensure that human rights, equality, and an ethos of inclusion shaped the historic Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is still in the news because it's ever more important today. It's actively being used to prevent a hard border being established in Ireland, and I think when you're living about 3 or 4 miles from it, as we are here, you're pretty grateful for that. So we wanted to invite Bronagh Hinds from the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition to share her experience of what that was like 21 years ago. And we also wanted to invite someone who's always on the television and is a great inspiration to me, who's sometimes on the television but not enough. Alison Morris from the Irish News, a very insightful political commentator as well, who we're very glad to see on programmes like The View and Sunday Politics. So we've invited them here tonight to share their experiences. We will see the film Wave Goodbye to Dinosaurs, and after that Alison will interview Bronagh on what happened behind the scenes during the peace negotiations and what we can learn from her experience going forward and facing the challenges that we now face. We will also be hearing from them afterwards on what we as women in our own communities can do to bring our own perspectives forward at this critical time, to inspire us to get engaged and to stay engaged in political life despite the challenges. Our ambition tonight is to inform, stimulate, challenge and inspire you to realise what we can do when we work together. In celebrating the historic contribution of women to Northern Irish society, we hope to lay the foundation for future activities amongst you all that will help build confidence in women, political awareness, and get them involved, even at a very local level. So now I would like you all to put your hands together for our speakers. For first of all, we'll be hearing from Bronagh, who will introduce the film, if that's okay. So, and after the film, there will be a time for questions once we've seen. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I have to confess that I did go down to school in this area, not quite Newry, but along the coast in Kilkeel. I'm delighted at the turnout, and I particularly also welcome our friends from Cavan and from Donegal who have travelled so far to be with us this evening. Beyond and I can tell you the stunning stuff that they're doing in mobilising both in Donegal and in Cavan is amazing, thanks to the Next Chapter project. In terms of the film, I might as well say now what I was going to say later, but you'll see it. This Women, War and Peace is one of a series of films that Abigail Disney had been funding, because it's not so much, and you'll hear somebody say this in the film, that women are written out of history. They're not actually ever written into history. And you know what we're all here to do is actually to change that story together. But it is one of other films that you also might wish to look at. For example, there's one on Liberia called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Now, in 2009, the Irish government asked me to work with them to launch their work on women, peace and security. And we started off with a cross-learning project that involved Ireland, North and South, Timor-Leste, which is in Asia, and Liberia in Africa. And one of the things that we did in Liberia as part of it was a week-long programme in each place. One of the things that we did was we showed the film Pray the Devil Back to Hell in Liberia, and we had to start that film no less than 4 times, because every time it was started, the trauma that broke out was enormous, enormous. And no wonder. And sometimes we also forget the amount of trauma that actually has invested itself in all of us, and the importance of the work that we need to continue to do to make sure that that's not passed down to generations. But one of the things that I'm very pleased, which I think this film captures more than anything else, is it involves and interviews many, many women in this film, and not all the films do that. And why I'm very proud of that is because I always tell people when I'm travelling elsewhere, is one of the things that we are very rich in Northern Ireland, even before the Peace Programme monies, but helped along by Peace Programme funding, was the extent and diversity of our community-based work. In fact, I was working with a colleague who once said to me, he took a sabbatical from his work, and he was travelling around to learn experiences and to learn about community development elsewhere. And the major lesson he learned, he told me when he came back, this was when I was director of the Ulster People's College, he said the main lesson he learned was there was more community activity and community development in Northern Ireland than anywhere else he had been. And I think that is fundamentally the base of the Women's Coalition. That if it hadn't been for groups and lots of women across Northern Ireland and in Newry, I've been down here many times, and we can talk later about some difficult debates that we also had as a Women's Coalition, one of which I remember very vividly in Newry. But the Women's Coalition wouldn't have been possible without that, in my belief. And I think it's also important to know, with so many of us here and so many women moving in other places, that together we can do it again. Nothing is impossible.
I find that a very emotional, raising film, and it makes me very inspired. So we're going to pass over now to Alison Morris from the Irish News, political commentator also, to interview Bronagh, who was a voice throughout that film. And afterwards we'll have a chance to ask our own questions, and I would urge you all to take the opportunity to do so, because it's a very rare event. And I'm not sure how many of you have seen that film before, but it's pretty interesting, isn't it? So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Alison and Bronagh.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. Nothing makes me happier than being in a room full of ballsy, kick-ass women who are all political, so I'm happy to hear your questions. But to start going, I haven't seen the film before, and every time I watch it, and I think that's the third time, I see something different in it that I missed the first time, because it was such an historic time. But coming up to that, I'm struck by how many of those women who were involved in that, who were involved in those early days of the civil rights process. And that, again, I think when Bernadette McCalliskey was talking about those sort of black civil rights protesters, that's where you started as well. You came from the Bloody Sunday marches, you walked in the civil rights marches.
Yeah, no, that's true. I referred to the time when I was at school in Kilkeel and watching the news, and I was very fired up by civil rights at the time because it was very strong internationally. So when I went up to university in 1970, there had been People's Democracy, as you know, and that was beginning to fade away a bit more, and the Civil Rights Association was coming to the fore, and we set up the first students' branch of the Civil Rights Association. And if anyone goes up to the Bloody Sunday Museum in Derry, you'll see the student flag up there, the Queen's University Civil Rights Association flag there. I actually brought that up to Bloody Sunday wrapped around my body underneath a huge coloured jumper because we didn't want to get stopped at the time. And I suppose it'd be offensive weapons now, but we had a load of hurley sticks in the back, pretending we were going to go up and play a camogie match so that we could get through as many roadblocks as possible.
You were also one of the co-founders of the Northern Ireland Women's Rights Movement, and again, I mean, as a young girl, I remember we hadn't got very much in our house, but with a load of books, and I used to be really inspired by those American feminists who at that time would have been considered madly radical for having ideas which are probably pretty run-of-the-mill now. But I noticed that one of the things she said it was rent a creche. Explain to me what this is.
Okay, I suppose that grew out of the Northern Ireland Women's Rights Movement, which we like to think of as the first radical women's movement in Northern Ireland. We set up the first women's centre. Now there are loads of women's centres which are great. It's the Belfast Women's Centre. We set up the Women's Education Project, which has become the Women's Resource and Development Agency, which is doing such great work across Northern Ireland. And Rent a Creche. Well, we thought if women are going to be able to participate in conferences, speak at conferences, get into decision-making positions, we need something to look after the children. All these right-on men in the trade union movement were paying lip service to the issue about women's empowerment, but doing absolutely nothing about it. So always come up with a solution. So what we did is we got some money from Children in Need. We bought a load of toys. We went and interviewed qualified childcare workers. We set up a rota and we told them to organise a creche at every conference, and that it wasn't too much trouble to them, they just had to hire it from us. So we went along with the creche worker, qualified, or numbers of creche workers, and toys. In fact, my own daughter for a long time, they used to have their big conferences, Irish Congress of Trade Unions, in the Grosvenor Hall, and they used to book a room in the Europa Hotel for the creche. So for years, my daughter thought the Europa Hotel was a creche. She also thinks she had a very deprived life.
I'm still struck as what you've said now, because my children are up in their rays, but when my first days, when I first started becoming a journalist, there's sometimes that I had them sitting in the corner of the Anderson's Town newspaper doing their homework while I worked, whereas the men could have all left and went and play football on Friday afternoon, and this was an actual thing, while you'd still been bringing your children around, which is why the suffragettes dug up the golf courses, because that's where they fucking go, and then they promote each other, and then they all get jobs that they're not qualified to do. And that's the reason. It's you know, the after 5 o'clock on a Friday drinks that women can't go to, that have to go home, and that's for all that at that stage. So I was really struck by the sort of rent a creche idea, that you get women who are trade unionists and activists and just say, there's a creche, put your children in there and go and have your voice heard.
Yeah, exactly.
When you moved on to the Women's Coalition, and we've seen the setting up of that, and we know everything that went along with that, we talk a lot about how it was the first party that was cross-community. It had people from a Protestant and Catholic background. But I was more struck as someone who comes from a very working class background as the class divide within that party, because that doesn't exist in traditional parties as well. I know Felicity Coos quite well, but Felicity and Pearl are two women you would necessarily put together. Felicity is a very posh woman who's answering things in the Women's Coalition. She's very, very, very posh. And these are not women who would traditionally even have known each other, have met each other, and all of a sudden they're in the same political party together.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. And Meg Blood, who's a really good friend of mine, and the place where the meeting took place was the Ulster People's College, and I had written to the women's groups across Northern Ireland as chair of the Northern Ireland Women's European Platform, and we had organised all the meetings in the Ulster People's College because that's the venue we had access to, given that we had no money. And I used to have these arguments with May all the time. May would say, oh, that feminism, because she'd say, you know, all this thing, and we can come back to what Bernard Devlin said later, but May would say, all these feminists, you know, it's all a middle class idea, it's all those educated women from university, and he used to round up, because May's a great feminist, but she never uses the word, like we've refound the word feminism to mean different things, but it's perfectly right, because the Women's Coalition had not just middle class and working class women, and Protestant Catholic women, loyalist and Republican women, nationalist and unionist women, rural women, urban women. But one of the significant things is, actually, when this film was being made, and I understand the BBC was behind it as well. But they weren't moved to make the film when Abigail Disney approached them, because they said, oh, it's just a bunch of middle-class women. Now, even if it had been a bunch of middle-class women, it was still unusual. But actually, it wasn't a bunch of middle-class women. But what was a very interesting fact was a lot of the grassroots women who hadn't had opportunities in life had returned as adults to education. So there was some common thread in terms of adult returners to education. Actually, many of them through community-based education, through things like the Ulster People's College and the Workers' Education Association, which unfortunately no longer exist.
And again, the very first time I watched this, I was struck by that, because I remember the Women's Coalition. I remember, we know what the attitude to unionist men was. We have heard the attitude of the DUP to the Women's Coalition, and Peter Robinson saying it's a woman's job to support her husband. It didn't age very well, did it, that comment? I'm sure he's seen that, he cringes now. But as a girl who was growing up in a Republican community, the propaganda perception of the Women's Coalition are, these are posh women trying to tell you what to do. But when I watched it back, I thought, that was just propaganda and spin, because there's nothing posh about half those women. They are proper, as May described them, street fighters. Yes. Women who grew up, women's groups, feminist groups, looking after their children and being on the street.
Absolutely. Through everything, working right across Northern Ireland in all sorts of community groups, in their families, in their communities, at work, organising in the labour movement, all sorts of things, fighting for equal pay at work, all of those things those women were involved in.
No, and those 2 years and those times of the difficult talks, I know that the Hillary Clinton part was a later addition to the documentary, but what also struck me is two women who had managed to get themselves agency and in positions of power, Mo Molan and Hillary Clinton, they didn't pull the ladder up behind them. They were the two women, Mo during the peace talks, who constantly, and I know that the part said about getting into the toilets, but that wasn't a one-off. I think I talked to Monica about this, and she said that you had worked out that if you timed your toilet breaks, you could get her to your cells in the toilets, and that was the only time. And then Hillary Clinton, that time when you went to Washington. So they're two very powerful women who did help, and I think that women helping other women was part of the women's coalition.
It's absolutely essential. Women helping other women is absolutely essential. Now, Mo had a longer track record because she was assistant shadow Secretary of Northern Ireland, actually under the radar with, I'm just trying to remember his name, long-standing Shadow Secretary of State, and used to come here and make contact with people, and went out of her way to make contacts in the women's sector when nobody else had bothered before, and continued that throughout, and never forgot it. I remember actually, it was the Women's Coalition, in the middle of the talks, there was, actually it must have been the first summer, there were really, really bad violence around the marching and protests against the marching and what to do. And Mo actually brought almost a women's powwow round the table up in her kind of suite of rooms to sit down and talk about what could be done to try and come out with solutions. So she was always looking for that and creating opportunities. Hillary Clinton and Milan Verveer, not just in terms of the Women's Coalition. I remember one of the forerunners to this was a piece of work that we did around the Fourth World Conference of Women in Beijing. And that was the conference where Hillary Clinton made her big speech about women's rights or human rights. That also was the conference that we organised from the Northern Ireland Women's European Platform. People came to me and said, can you organise for us to get to Beijing? That's another story, it would take a whole day to tell. But actually the largest international delegation of travelling women from Northern Ireland went to Beijing. Now, that track record with Hillary, just thinking back to there, but getting involved in the talks, has continued throughout. She has paid tribute to the women of Northern Ireland, not just the Women's Coalition, to the women of Northern Ireland in terms of also her interest, because she's done a lot on women, peace and security internationally, and says that she drew a lot of lessons from here, which she, as well as we, have been working with internationally.
And I think in the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement was the first time that I think we discussed a lot of these issues in those 20 years. I was struck by, I chaired a lot of events, and in some of those events I, as the person chairing them, was the only woman on the panel, because it was, you know, a rodeo. Like, I mean, it was, you know, let's all stroke each other's ego, and without maybe yourselves and Mo, who's no longer with us. Even now, at this point in time, it's visible to see how few women were actually involved in those talks. And as a consequence of that, a lot of the issues, the bread and butter issues, weren't prioritised and didn't make it as far up the agenda as they should have.
I think that's right. Let me just, I mean, we refer to the issue about Kate Farron, who's from the Newry Armagh area, referred to it about having to think and how are we going to write all of this in, and we were writing in texts. And in a sense, also referring to Bernadette Devlin's remark about, you know, it's a pity they didn't take the feminist agenda along with us. I think it's worth saying two things. First of all, yes, we were trying to find a peace, but most of the people who were involved in it were involved at some level, whether consciously or subconsciously, involved in women's rights and human rights throughout it. That's why they were there and part of the Women's Coalition. That's the work that was being done on the ground, and that's where that some of us were articulating also at European level. But it was certainly there. But we didn't have the whole range of 8 or 9 UN Security Council resolutions that are now in being for women in other conflicts on women, peace and security, which addresses violence against women. It addresses women's participation at all levels, including in negotiations and in conflict resolution and in post-conflict work, and women's perspectives and gender balancing in the outcomes. Now, if you think, and I know because I'm working on Syria and in other conflict situations, if you know how hard those women and we have to fight still with those resolutions, you can imagine where we were in these negotiations. And yet we thought that we were winning because we were writing these words in. You know, we were writing community development in. We were writing about the advancement of women in public life. We wrote in women's equal political participation. We wrote in the civic forum. We wrote in victims. And you think about the areas that have been allowed to slip. The last people to have been looked after here about are the victims of our conflict. And it was women who championed that. And victims have an equal right. And
I was going to mention that next. I think it was shocking for some people. The victims weren't going to be in that agreement at all. You know, the women who were like waiting on Momolan to go for a wee, to get a hold of her, were the people who were saying you cannot let this go without. And that is the one issue that has completely and utterly polluted our peace. It has poisoned it. If we now, with the benefit of hindsight, look back, had that been dealt with then, we would probably be in a much better situation now.
Well, you can say two things. One is that we as women participated in ensuring that a comprehensive agenda was addressed. We minimised the conflict within the room, and I could give you lots of examples of how we did that in order to move the agenda forward. We dealt with all the institutional, the decommissioning, the policing, all of those other issues. But exactly like you're saying on victims, let me tell you what people are finding now in conflict situations. That women are the ones who are the early warners. Women are the ones who are the predictors of what needs to be done in the future. And the more that we leave women out, the less comprehensive will be our peace, the more breakdowns that will happen because we have eyes almost in the back of our heads, because we're used to dealing with that at multiple levels. But so I think we as women could put pressure on around ensuring that our victims are treated seriously and properly, and that we could argue. Let me say one thing about the Civic Forum. We did want electoral reform because we wanted something even more democratic and participative than proportional representation. I have to tell you, the other parties said to us, oh, that would be bringing too many people in. That would be difficult to manage. And we're going, actually, we would like it to be broader. We would like different voices in there. It's one of the reasons why I utterly opposed the amendments that the Assembly made to the original agreement to reduce the number of people in the Assembly from 108 to 90, whatever it is. Now, I know the public wanted it because they see the politicians up there and it's, a waste of money, a waste of taxpayers' money. I get that. But believe me, the compromise position over our wanting to broaden the electoral process further and reducing it to 5 seats was to have 6 seats per constituency, because that was to get the smaller parties, the unheard voices in. So in my view, that's been a backward step. The second thing, and the reason why we opted for the Civic Forum is this, and the politicians were always afraid of it because they thought this is going to take the power from us. And it's not, because politicians have to have their place. But democracy is not about voting once every 5 years. It's about an iterative process between people and politicians. And we also felt if we actually had economic and social and cultural actors in a civic forum talking about the everyday issues, assisting the politicians, it would have created a momentum force to keep us moving forward in the peace process. That's also what it was for. And now what people are saying is we actually need it now because we do need citizens' voices heard. And we can mobilise around that and ask, why is this the only institution in the agreement that is still suspended?
And even, now, because we're in a pretty dire situation politically, locally, the Citizens Forum, I've heard people in recent months and even over the past 3 years saying that we could re-establish it even before you could re-establish the Assembly and get. We've seen the massive changes having a Citizens Forum has done in the South with regards to constitutional change and legacy change and social change and all those sort of things. Do you still think there's a place maybe for a civic forum here and now, even with the current political impasse?
Well, there is a need for a civic forum. The way in which it was established in the agreement, if you look at it, is not the way in which we envisaged it or wished to have it established, but it was the only way we were able to get it in. And that was that it had to be appointed by the First and the Deputy First Minister. So actually it can't be established without a First and a Deputy First Minister in place. However, here's what I would do. I would establish one in waiting as a shadow and show it can be done, so that when the Assembly is up and running, we have actually more pressure on to ensure that one is appointed, and not appointed with political fingers in the pie, but actually appointed from the economic and social actors as it was meant to be in the first place.
As someone who was there and seen how difficult those negotiations were, do you find it frustrating, depressing? How do you find the fact that it was allowed to fritter away over the space of that 20 years?
I do find it frustrating and disappointing, but I was just making a few notes there to remind myself of some of the things that we helped with, and some of that also pointed out to me what some of the problems are. Like when we went into the negotiations, even before they started, Senator Mitchell was meeting all the parties just to do a, hello, how are you, welcome, see some faces. And he was asking all the parties, well, have you anything to raise at this point? And we cheekily said, I had spotted that there was a major problem in the rules of procedure for the negotiations. So I pointed out to him that we had run an election process which was inclusive to bring other stakeholders into it, but we had a decision-making process in the rules of procedure which meant that we could all go home except the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP, who were at that time the two largest parties, because between them they represented the majority and the majority on either side of the community. So he spotted that immediately and said, can you have an amendment on my desk when we start next week? And we did that. We also it took a long time to come to a comprehensive agenda in those talks. And suddenly one day the agenda appeared. And at the bottom of the agenda was signed by the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party, and all hell broke loose in the room. We had this process where any party could call for an adjournment. And so Dr. Paisley called for an adjournment to go out with Bob McCartney, There were the two parties who were elected to the talks at that time to undermine them because they're not saying anything untruthful.
No.
They know they went in because they didn't want the talks. They wanted to disrupt them. So they went out of the room to decide what they were going to say. In that time they were out of the room, I went to the two leaders, it was John Taylor at the time and John Hume, and said to them in quite polite words, "Are you mad? Did you not think that you should get other parties to sign that agenda? Would it not be better? So that would be a good idea." So in that break, ran round all of the other parties. They said, John Hume said yes, John Taylor said yes, if you can get everybody else to agree to it. Got all of the other parties to sign up. Went back into centre, Mitchell said to him, "I send the two party leaders in to let you know that we've agreed that 7 parties are going to sign that agenda." 2 were out of the room. Sinn Féin wasn't in at that time. And when the agenda appeared, it was signed by 7 parties, and the opposition melted away because the opposition was predicated on the basis that the Ulster Unionists had betrayed the Unionist community to sign an agenda with the SDLP, but actually there were several Unionist parties, the small loyalist groups had signed it. Then just coming to the end of it, when you asked me that question, one of the things that we worked on at the end was a proposal to try and get all of the parties, once we'd agreed the agreement, that we would jointly promote it. That was the stage we couldn't get to. We could agree the agreement, but we couldn't get agreement on the Women's Coalition push that the parties could actually promote it together. And obviously that was politically difficult for some parties. I still believe to this day that we would have created a better snowball even now had we been able to win a solidarity as much as possible against the 8 parties who were prepared to sign it to actually push it forward.
I just wonder how, and as a journalist who covered that, I wondered at the time, had it happened before, would RHI have collapsed it? Because the previous scandals before, if journalists would have came here from England or if I spoke to them, any number of those scandals that happened before that would have collapsed most normal democracies. We weren't a normal democracy. There was a lot of back scratching going on. There was a lot of, I'll turn a blind eye to your messes if you turn a blind eye to mine. And it wasn't, as RHI inquiry showed, it was not a functioning government as the way it was intended. Did you think that when you were negotiating the style of government it would be, that would be a lasting, that mandatory coalition would be lasting? Or was that just a stopgap, do you think, to get us over that hump? Because I suppose a lot of people have looked back and said that was a process that was designed for the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP to head up. It wasn't designed for where our politics went to have 2 sworn enemies as the First and Deputy First Minister. Should we have changed, maybe have a renegotiation at some stage to change it to maybe a more normalised standard of politics?
I slightly disagree with that on this basis. Those of us who are old enough in the room will remember the previous attempt to put a power sharing executive together in the 1970s, which was the effort of putting the Ulster Unionists to the SDLP glued together with the Alliance Party in the middle. And I would rather characterise that as an effort to get a mandatory coalition on that basis together. I saw these negotiations as somewhat different, and this was also the difference between, with due respect to anybody from any other party in the room, and let me be very clear, I think that any woman has any right to be a member and to be elected for any party, not just the Women's Coalition, whether it's Sinn Féin, the Alliance Party, the DUP, any party, so I'm just saying that there. But the difference between, because people kept mixing up the Women's Coalition and the Alliance Party, they were very different because the Women's Coalition was very much a party of inclusion, did not believe in leaving out what other people call the extremes. And my work with people on the ground, including paramilitaries on the ground, now I might say something different about some unreconstructed paramilitaries today that we as women need to be doing something about in terms of rescuing our communities from them. But we had done a lot of work, and I was hearing more progressive things coming from people in those parties necessarily than from the centre. So that's the one thing. What I don't think that we entirely expected but should have is that in the early days it was always going to be difficult because we still have 2 parties or a party in government remember, who never signed up to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and I think that's a great difficulty. And I hear other parties, including unionist parties, wanting to go back to where the Good Friday Agreement was, rather than some of the other agreements since. So I think we have to get over that in the community. We cannot have a government which is partly run by a party who has inherited the benefits of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and actually is not honourable in terms of leading on that. And I'm prepared to have that argument with people in the DUP as well.
I know it's interesting to hear them using the Good Friday Agreement to the Brexit negotiations now, given the fact that they were never supporters of it in the first place.
Exactly, and reinterpreting, by the way, what the principle of consent was about, completely reinterpreting, which took a lot of work by Martin Mansur on behalf of the Irish government to convince Sinn Féin in terms of the consent principle. But so that's one thing. The second thing is, I don't think that I quite thought, and this is pointed at all parties, but particularly at the two leading parties, this is not about a peace process so that I can get this for my community and you can get this for your community. We don't want governing like that. That was not what the intention was. They need to sort out their differences and govern for all of the people together collectively. And that's what I think has been the difficult thing that they have to resolve. Now, having said that, I think Sinn Féin would have liked to have kept government together. I think it was people in the streets, and not just Sinn Féin voters, who were saying, this RHI scandal has gone too far. It's a step too far. So all of the levels of corruption that have been going on through many different scandals, and the whole issue of governing for each community instead of governing for the whole community needs to be tackled.
Do we need a George Mitchell-style character? Do we need someone from the outside, do you think, to come and reconvene talks to get Stormont up and running again? I know that the well has been poisoned by the confidence in supply chain and relying on the Secretary of State to chair talks, who obviously has skin in the game. But do you think that would maybe make a difference? Because you were there and you see the difference that George Mitchell and his team made.
Well, I think a facilitator always makes a difference. An informed facilitator who operates in a very honourable and even-handed way, I think is a great asset. I think parties could have reached across had they wanted. I think your reference to confidence on supply, Dee, has really, really undermined, actually I would say not just undermined, because this is something which puts together a fairly divided community, fairly evenly divided across the community, if we're just talking about two big blocks for a start. And it's completely undermined that. But I would argue it's undermined everybody else, including a large number of unionists, in relation to having made that confidence and supply deal with one particular party. And it's not at all helpful. So getting out of that, I think, might need a facilitator.
We do have female leaders now in political parties, which we didn't have when, until the Women's Coalition came along. We do have a lot of women standing in assembly. Well, I believe there's only one woman in the Westminster standing in the general election in this constituency. But the pressures that you used to see during the Troubles and the death threats and everything else, that hasn't went away. But what young women now and anyone in this room who wanted to get interested in politics on a public platform now has to do with social media and the age that we have there, and the fact that women are criticised and targeted. And I did a study with Amnesty where they looked at my social media, but at that point in time I think it was they were looking at some of the female MPs in Westminster, and some of them had over 1 million abusive messages sent to them, including rape threats and death threats and all sorts of other things. I mean, how do you think, being someone who was in the public eye and received all that criticism, how can you prepare Steely yourself for that?
I think, well, first of all, I think that you jump in, right? I do think that you need to develop a certain amount of a thick skin without losing the empathy and the reach across. I think you surround yourself by good people, including good people who will validly critique you so that you can be better, so that people surround you. But this is what I think. We have more women in politics now. I'm often asked the question, is it all different because there are party leaders there or women? No, we're talking about generations of embedded culture that has not changed. And if we're looking at the leadership across the world and the role models, it is really bad at the minute. Really bad male role models in many countries.
I don't think the
around
patriarchal
world.
nature of our society has changed at all, despite the fact that women in
Exactly.
visible positions. A couple of weeks ago, those loyalist meetings that are taking place in relation, I had made a comment on social media about the fact that there's no women at any of the top tables, and a guy sent me a tweet saying they were involved in organising it and doing the voter registration. Do you want them to do all that and then have to speak as well? I'm like, what? That might be handy, yeah, tea breaks and tray. But I mean, I thought it's, you know, in this day and age, it just seems so unthinkable that women in marginalised communities like that are still put in those supportive roles rather than, you know, intelligent young women being put to the front and allowed to speak. And whether we disagree with what they're saying or not, they should be able to say
But it
it.
tells you what those groups are about. I mean, it's not very long ago since the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, the Women's Resource and Development Agency and the National Women's Council of Ireland did a major project involving 1,000 women across Northern Ireland and in the southern border counties. And one of the things that women were saying to them was that where women were running community groups and stuff before, paramilitaries are back over, trying to find a different role. I'm not talking about those who have turned over a new leaf, because some of them have and are given good leadership, but some are not. They're embedded in, they're being funded as if they are community leaders.
And they're squeezing women's groups out.
They're
taking their funding
squeezing
off.
women's groups out. They're bullying in areas. They are grooming young men to be, and young men are looking, can I be this hero and run around with this big car? And actually young women as well, looking around for trophy girlfriends and all of this. And women were reporting this across Northern Ireland, and in some communities worse than others. So I really think that we need to band together and start to be brave to face up. And I know people feel endangered by this, but this is what I think. I think when I look at what has happened in Britain and the social media, actually, I think that it's probably more dangerous for women in Britain, in England actually, let's say, in
English
England,
nationalism is making things
in
worse,
English
yeah.
nationalism at the moment, I think it's more difficult for those women in England now than it is for us, and maybe we can mobilise and do something about it.
To do my job, which was security journalism, which was considered to be a man's job when I did it. It was like the fast show, you know, I'd say things and then people didn't look at me and then a man said exactly the same thing and they were all like, wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing, how do you think of that? Yeah, I mean, I think, and I see that sometimes in politics as well, where I go, I know I've heard that somewhere before, and then I realise it was because a woman said it 2 weeks ago, you know, and someone's stolen their words, and all of a sudden it's prophetic, you know, it's something amazing.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that there are women here who have travelled, and I really want to hear from some of them in the border counties, because we're facing Brexit, which is, let's face it, the biggest threat to this island. I think since the end of the conflict, I know there's women who've travelled up in Cavan and all sorts of other places. I want to get some questions in so we can all hit the road before if it's midnight. Is there anyone want to raise their hand? Does anyone want to ask a question? I'm specifically looking at you lovely women down here, because I know you're from the board.
Anybody want me to go down and you can ask a question to Alison or Bronagh? We got a question? Yes? A second.
And can I also say, when I do these things in a room full of men, they nearly beat each other to get a hold of the microphone, and then they stand up and say absolute nonsense. You can stand up and ask really interesting questions. This is, a safe space for us all.
Well, my name's Tracy. The question I was actually going to ask was about for young women to try and get them interested in politics nowadays, because a lot of the tribalism actually turns them off, and a lot of them think, well, I can get educated, I can be elected. What is the need for feminism now? What do how do you see what the issues are for them at that? Because it's only with experience and life experience that a lot of us women here know the challenges that we face in life. But for young women starting out, they sort of see the world as their oyster, as the young so often do, and they don't realise what lies ahead of them. So how can we get them interested in that?
I'm just trying to think. I mean, we all started out as young women.
In my head, I still am.
Well, in my head,
I stopped mentally age at about 25 or something. I'm like, that'll do.
In my head, I still am, but I don't know whether I can admit to that, here. So I'm just trying to think back. I think it's it's things that people, it's like what we said, it's things that people say in their everyday lives that they think is unfair or is happening to them, and it's about mobilising around that. So I think it's about, let me say, there's a fantastic organisation called Youth Action that works and does great work with young women. And they've been mobilising young women around, women's empowerment, women's leadership. The Brexit issue, actually, talking about the Brexit issue is what mobilises young people an awful lot, because what they see is a loss of opportunity, a loss of freedom of movement, a loss of kind of wider horizons. Now, I know that doesn't apply to every young people, because not everybody sees it like that, but there must be. What do you think if I throw that back to you, what do you think when you're talking to young people around you?
I was thinking about it, and then when Alison mentioned Brexit, I think it's the most obvious one, to get young people interested in politics. And also, how we change politics from being less adversarial into more compromising and talking shop.
I thought when I watched the repeal movement in the South, and you see those hundreds of thousands of young women mobilised and becoming politicised, and at that time I think, when this is over and when that legislation passed, I hope they just don't go back to their normal lives. I hope now they've got a taste of the fact that if they take to the streets they can change things, that they use that on other issues. Because I think that we're very politicised here in the North. I think, I meet young people who would talk about politics the way that if you went to England they wouldn't have a clue, if you spoke to someone that age. But the thing is, if you get young people mobilised in something they're interested in, and then keep them mobilised to start making changes. But as a female journalist, when I go and talk to young girls, I would say, if you can't see it, how do you know you can be it? And so the fact is that there's times that I went into work and the cops showed up to tell me I had a paramilitary death threat, and the boss said go home, and I said no, because if my byline isn't in the paper tomorrow, they'll think that they sent me home afraid. So I'm going to stay here and work, and I'm going to make sure that my name's in the paper tomorrow so that they know that they haven't won. And after a while, when they realise you won't back down and you won't go away, well then the threats stop, they become less. The only thing that made me laugh is when they said that I should change my working hours so that I wouldn't, they wouldn't know what time to come and shoot me, and the boss said they should try she should try coming in at 9 o'clock, they'd never get her in, which they wouldn't have, because I waltz in at 10:30 every morning. But yeah, I think it's that you have to see it, and that's what the Women's Coalition did. That was visible. There were women who were out there and doing it, and you were looking at it and going, well, if that woman who's exactly like me, or she's exactly like my sister, or exactly like my mother, if she can do it, well then I can. See it, debate.
And actually, sometimes just asking people for a hand, I'm just thinking, if somebody, I can't do really social media. Everybody's asked me to get on Twitter and this, that and the other. But if you're actually doing something and you want social media because it matters so much, who's better at social media than young people? Just get a few of them in and say, actually, can you join us in this? Because we really can't do this as well. We need somebody to take over this aspect. There's a role in it. There's a real role.
Hello, so glad that now you're listening.
If you don't mind, can I add to the last point there? Is that okay? Yeah. I think one of the big things is that we need to look at politics with a small p, and look at the range of different ways that women can get involved in a whole range of different organisations, and about women helping women as well. So if you see, we're all in different positions and do different things, and if you see women coming up, and even if it's a small thing, you think, there's a bit of a spark there, or there's something happening, or there's a view, or something, there's a whole range of sort of skills that you see in normal life. I don't think we kind of support each other enough to be able to do that and say, listen, you can do it, give it a go. And the other thing is, it's all right to fail. There's nothing wrong with that, and you need a whole range of different forums to be able to try out different skills. But the politics with a small p I'm talking about is looking at health, looking at social housing, looking at poverty, looking at the street lamps, looking at the dog do on the road, all of the different things that you can get involved in without actually having to, and that builds your confidence in being able to get involved in
the patriarchy turned us against each other, because it said if there's 10 people who work in here, only one of them can be a woman. So then if a younger woman came in, the older woman thought she's going to have to steal my job, and then us all hate each other. So it's that helping each other because there's room for us all.
I think we have somebody from Cavan here that wants to speak.
Yeah. it's about when you're talking about how to get people mobilised, young people, back to the south. What we did with the young people, like Keena here, my child is a man child, I like to call him, he's only 26. But what we did was we put a face on equal marriage. We actually said young people and grandmother. And if, just for argument's sake, say your child, if mine a man, say my child was gay and he wanted to get married, he went to his grandmother and he said to her, I need your vote. And she looked at him and went, but you're not gay. And he said to her, but what if I was? And she went, well, it'd make no difference to me, really. You're, my grandson, whatever. And he got her to the vote and she voted for it. But that's from the young to the old, everybody working together with social media. I was in tears watching everybody come through Dublin Airport, any airport, to get their vote. So it's how I think with social media, with young people, get them involved.
Come on, women, that deserves a round of applause. There's a massive inspiration.
Somebody over here. Eileen.
Bronagh, we've talked about human rights being central to the negotiations, the peace negotiations and the Good Friday Agreement, and yet it's only because the Assembly is not sitting that we've seen some changes this year in human rights for equal marriage and women's rights, the implementation of the CEDAW report. What is your views, both of you, on the fact that the Northern Ireland Assembly had been sitting, we might not be where we are today on that? It's almost ironic that it was built on human rights and yet it would stand for so long in opposition to them.
I don't think we'd have got half of what happened if it hadn't been for the Westminster intervention. The problem was that there was no bravery there. So for 10 years, we keep telling that for 10 years they managed to work together. But if you look at the legislation that they passed, they didn't actually manage to work together. They all managed to sit in the same room together, but they didn't actually agree on very many things. And they certainly didn't agree on anything controversial, be that victims' pensions, be that same-sex marriage, be that reproductive rights, because none of them, and this is ironic given how many of them are men, had the balls to basically do it. What they wanted was, and I think that they wanted someone else to implement those measures so that they could come back afterwards when it was all the dirty work was done and then come in at the end of it. And that's what's happened, and that's probably could in some ways make it easier to get the Assembly back up and running. Albeit then I worry that when we come to putting the secondary legislation stuff in place that they'll come back in and then they'll just balls it all up again,
Yeah, I think that is worrying, but let me draw it out generally to the human rights issue and the civil rights issue. I think this is one of our greatest fault lines in the conflict, and when people talk about the other issues being the hard issues, we find this in other conflicts. Oh, it's about narrowing the ground and this power block just talking to this power block, and it's really about a shift in power. You have power and I want it, and then you do all the things about the political institutions and the policing and the security and all of those issues. And they think the other issues are the soft issues, whether it's about trauma and victims or human rights or equality. Those are the hard issues. Those are the citizenship issues. Those are the issues that go into all of the social and economic issues of the day. And unfortunately, two things. Civil rights and human rights have always been a contested issue in this community because Northern Ireland was set up in such a way that to maintain control, you had to abuse people's civil rights to maintain power. And that, therefore, has set up a negative flow into trying to assure our whole community that human rights and equality are universal principles that apply right across the community and to everyone. And we have a big job to do on that. And therefore, the issues that got us into the spiral of conflict those 40 years ago, of denial of certain civil rights, and what people say today in the denial of these rights is a continuation of that process in a different form. And we really have to get our head around a society which is governed by parties working together for the good of the whole community, based fundamentally on human rights and equality. We thought, and I remember going as Deputy Chief Commissioner for Equality, discussing in the first assembly with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, their assistants, the introduction of a single equality bill in Northern Ireland. And they both swore that that would be within the year. And at a time of our agreement, we were further ahead on equality legislation, having been behind the rest of the UK. At that time we were ahead, now we've slipped further behind, not just on these issues, but on other issues, because we cannot get our head around a community in which we will deal with human rights and equality as fundamental, universal rights.
It's a lot lately because I'm reporting on an election where victims' rights are being used as currency to try and terrify people out to vote.
Yeah.
And so they're being thrown around their feelings as if, they're electoral collateral. And what I think is there was glory in peace, and this is where I think that the women, all of us in this room, there was glory in that. There was glory in that for Bill Clinton, there was glory in that for Tony Blair, there was glory in that for John Hume, for Gerry Adams, for Ian Paisley at a later date, for David Trimble at the time. They've all made their living on it and written loads of books and travelled the world, and everyone backslaps them. And do you want to hear about how I fixed the peace? There's no glory in reconciliation. There's no book deals in fixing all those wee things that were allowed to slide. And I think that that's where other people who are not in it just for the glory and the backslapping and the book deals can step in. And that's where I've always found the women like, my mother, who would have done that kind of work for nothing and didn't know she was a feminist, but she was. That's where they step in, and I think that at this point in time, we need a reconciliation process, because we had a peace process, but we didn't fix everything else. We didn't work on the reconciliation.
Exactly. And we're back there. We're back, and the areas that are being cut in funding are human rights, equality, good relations, reconciliation, all of those. And just think back, when we talked about the power sharing executive in the 1970s, the first thing that they did, actually, was get rid of the Community Relations Commission in those days, because they thought, happy days, we've got a power sharing executive in 1972, that'll be grand, and what, the whole thing took off again. People don't realise that this takes decades and decades and decades to do well. And also, reconciliation is not a trade-off for rights and equality, which is the other thing that's often tried. It's actually a whole piece.
I'm going to have to wind it up there, because I realise that some of us have very... Look, one more question,
One
have
more
we?
question, please, Alison.
This is just to say, and I feel very inspired tonight listening to both of you. And I'm just finishing the 4th year of my first ever dabbling into being on a committee called the Policing and Community Safety Partnership. So I'm an independent member, and I've seen in the 4 years that there are lots more women coming on to that. Initially, when I started, we meet in council offices. You have to press a button to speak, and when you speak, the camera comes on you and your face is up on the big screen. It can be quite daunting. So tonight, what I take away, and a very positive thing from you, Suzanne, is that, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but certainly as I sat quiet, there were definitely lots of lights buzzing from men who talked about things, and honestly I don't know what it was about. So remember that we do have a voice, and I feel that I've learned we have an awful lot to say. And if as women we can all build each other up, as Deirdre said, work together. And I've seen wonderful work in cooperation between all communities. I've also the sort of disadvantage of being on the bonfires, flags and emblems committee, and sometimes I wonder, where we're ever going to go with that one. But also with yourself, Bronagh, what I'll take away tonight from you is that vision of you behind Dr. Paisley. And, he was a big man in stature, he was a very loud man, and yet you got your point across, you did not give up, and that's what we all have to remember too. Don't let your voice, we have a lot to do, we have a lot to say, and we can all hopefully create a better community for each other. So I feel very inspired tonight by both of you. And just those two things, talk and don't let anybody try to talk over you as well, Bronagh. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Could everyone just have another big round of applause for Bronagh Hinds? I think
I was actually to do that job. My name's Martina. I'm a member of the Next Chapter Newry group, and I'd like you to join me in showing another round of appreciation for two inspiring speakers, Bronagh and Alison. Thank you very much. If you could just bear with me for one wee minute. This wouldn't have worked this evening without all the inspiring people that's in the room this evening and for coming out tonight and supporting our event. So I want to give a big round of applause for everybody for taking your seat here this evening. The Next Chapter is a group of women who are active in making a difference in Newry, and you'll see from the flyer on your table that we've had a very busy October and November. There's a few of us will sleep really well this evening now. A wide range of women with many different skills are involved, sharing their interest and expertise to bring new events to this area. So please keep in touch through your email, Facebook and Twitter accounts to read flyers on your table. For a taste of what's coming up, Eileen Fagan, who spoke at the introduction, is running a workshop on Thursday the 5th of December on CEDAW. And for anyone who doesn't know what CEDAW is, it's the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and why it matters to anyone wanting to improve women's lives. In relation to media and communication, the Newry chapter are participating in a visit to the BBC studios in Belfast on Tuesday the 14th of January, and our next group meeting is on Thursday the 9th of January in Granite Exchange. We'd very much like to find out what you, as women in Newry, would like to see happening here. We're sending out a short survey in the next few days to your emails, so please take a couple of minutes just to fill it in and see how we can keep this momentum going. Feel free to stay around and have a chat and a nibble. There's a few nibbles at the back of the room, and there'll be a bar open when we finish up here this evening. I want to thank you everyone for making this a very exciting and motivating night, and I wish us all safe home. Thank you very much.
We're here at the Next Chapter night for Inspiring Women, and a fantastic night where we watched a film, Wave Goodbye to the Dinosaurs. We had Bronagh Hinds and Alison Morris from the Irish News talking and inspiring a lot of women and inspiring me to do more and to make sure that my voice is heard at the next election, which is coming up very shortly, and hoping that Jackie, as our sole female candidate in the Newry and Armagh area, will be elected as the Alliance Councillor. Alliance MP, excuse me.
I know, I have to say, when you come to an event like today and you get involved with a group such as the Next Chapter, Politics Plus, I have to say I've been so inspired to get involved and to really have my voice heard and to have the voice of other women heard. I never thought in a million years that I'd ever be the person that would join a political party, but I'm so glad that I did, and I'm so glad that I have been encouraged, inspired, and really being supported by all of the women that have been involved in the Next Chapter, because you know, it's one of those cliches, isn't it, where people say, oh, you've friends for life, but you know you have, and these are genuine women who will, you know, at every stage will have your back, and that's what women need to do more for each other. We need to have each other's backs. We need to make sure that we are heard, that we are not scared, and that we have a right to be in the room.
And that's the whole thing. It's important women are heard, and it's being confident enough to make ourselves heard and to speak out, because that's what this group has given me the confidence to. And if you join Next Chapter in Newry, hopefully it will help inspire you in some small way in your community, in the local government or politics in some way, or to improve some way, be a positive influence in your life.
So please, please, please keep funding the Next Chapter. We need the money. We need you to keep this amazing group of women going. We have already made plans for the future. We know what we want to do. We know what we need to do. And please keep that funding coming.
All right, my name is Bronagh Hinds. I am one of the members of the Newry Next Chapter. And what Next Chapter has done for me is introduce me to a fantastic range of women that I would never have met in any other way. I mean, lawyers, people in the health industry, politicians. My own background is in history, storytelling and things like that. And we all add different things to the group in a fantastic way. We've really bonded, and what we want to do is extend that out to the women of Newry, because we know they are amazing and they need to be heard.
Thank you, Bronagh. My name is Eileen Fagan, and I'm a member of Newry Next Chapter because after being involved with women's groups and organisations in Belfast for many years, I have always dreamed of bringing something like this to Newry. And lo and behold, I met Bronagh. She's involved in archiving and the history of women. And I've met some fantastic people in this area that I was living beside and I didn't even know they were there. So thanks to Politics Plus for bringing us this project. We are going to continue as Next Chapter Newry. Come and join us. There is a lot to learn.
Yes.
There's a lot of fun to be had.
Yes.
And we just want you to come along. We meet once a month at the moment on a Thursday at 6 p.m. in the Granite Exchange in Newry. And we would love you to come along.
Yes, come along.